Grayson's grades are posted right now at 973ESPN.com. Let's head down to the bottom of that page here there, Scott. And got to start at the top, right? Doug Pederson, a big fat F from you on Grayson's grades this week, and probably his most warranted F of the season.
Well, so far, which is sad, to throw that little...
Are you indicating that it could get worse?
I'm a little worried about the next 4 weeks.
Let me ask you real quick. If I could give you a mulligan and say, you know what, we're just going to pull the plug and start from scratch, would you take it?
You mean not hire Doug Pederson?
No, meaning start over. Say, you know what, Doug, you're a little over your head. This isn't working out. We're gonna go ours, because I'm not an advocate of getting rid of a guy after 1 year. I've never thought
I'm not
that.
Either.
But how about in this situation? Have you seen enough to be concerned enough to say, you know what, I'm going to do it now because I know it's coming sooner than later?
I feel like that's the knee-jerk reaction to do, rather than the there's things that Doug Pederson does or says or how he reacts that show me, he'll learn. You just got to be patient with him. And unfortunately, this is a season where I don't think the playoffs were too far out of reach, and they're just not going to make it. And that's the unfortunate side of it. I was just disappointed to see him challenge his team not to tank it and to come out and fall behind 29-0. I just don't see any desire or energy or anything out of his players right now. And I think I saw, his news conference today he was challenged multiple times by the media. This love for the players. It's time for some tough love. It's time to really, put the boxing gloves on and start throwing the weight around in the locker room.
Didn't we wait for that for 12 years from Andy? 14 years? Hey, where's the tough love? When are you going to start? Never happened.
No, that's true. And there's all these, all the comparisons that tend to come out between Andy Reid and Doug Pederson. And, it's time to see if he's anti-Andy in some of these categories. And this is one of them. How do you finish out a season that is now lost? How do you take this and develop some of these younger players in these last 4 games? Because that's what they are. These are opportunities for these guys, like a Paul Turner, like a Carson Wentz, to get more time and work on his mechanics. But you can't keep throwing him out there to get 60 pass attempts. Are you kidding me? That's telling the defensive line to come out and just light up my guy, blow him up.
You gave him an F. You gave Jim Schwartz an F. Let me ask about Pederson first. What stood out in this game as, man, this guy is in, like, my reaction was, man, this guy's in over his head right now. He's getting just undressed by Paul Gunther, the defensive coordinator. He's just a step ahead of him every single time. What stood out about Pederson yesterday in the negative category?
Well, I think it's been kind of building towards this. It's just the lack of any kind of rhythm or appearance of a guy. I wrote this of a game plan. I just don't see any kind of idea where you're saying, okay, here's where I think there's a weakness on this defense. Here's how I'm going to attack it, and then going out and executing the plays. There's just nothing, and he's so quick to abandon the running game, which then, like I just said, 60 pass attempts. You're giving the defense a free pass on blowing up your offensive line and your quarterback. And I'm just honestly amazed that Carson Wentz has not gotten hurt at this point, because he's really been taking some shots. That's not, to me, any kind of an idea of a game plan or a way of going about trying to show, to play the game of chess, as coaches tend to do. And I've been saying this now for over a week. I think it's time for Pederson. I think it's past time for Pederson to give up the play calling. Let's try the last month of the season with Frank Reich doing it and Pederson focusing on being the head coach.
Scott Grayson with us. Grayson's grade, 60 pass attempts, really 63 if you count the ones where he pulled the ball down and ran with it. But Doug Pederson, not the only one to get an F on your Grayson's grades today. Jim Schwartz also gets an F. What disturbed you the most about the way his defense played?
I guess, and it comes down to the question of, and this I think would depend on whoever you ask, but is this defense playing for Schwartz at this point anymore, particularly the back end? I think the defensive line actually showed some desire and some energy yesterday, but the backside, there's just the zones, they're leaving way too big of holes between all these receivers. These guys don't look like they know what they're doing out there in terms of coverage and how to execute it, and it doesn't look like, and this is where I come back to Schwartz, has there been any coaching done in any way to try to get these guys to stop, having the back of their head facing the quarterback so much? Because that's a quarterback's dream in the NFL. Hey, look, here's a guy not looking at the ball. Boom, I'll just throw the ball right next to his ear hole, and it's a touchdown. And too many times this season, the defensive backs have just been you can't count on them. You can't count on them at all, and it's been that way for years now here in Philadelphia. And it's got to change. To me, this is quickly becoming one of their biggest areas of need heading into the offseason.
Yeah, as far as the defensive line, Doug did say today he counted 19 pressures when he went back and looked at the film, but we're talking a little bit about the Eagles and the Grayson's grades today on this Monday is the Eagles and Cincinnati Bengals. What an ugly mess that was yesterday in Ohio for sure. Scott, we're also curious today when we talked to you about Carson Wentz because the grade that you gave him was a D. Not a fail, but slightly above with a D. Your impressions of Carson Wentz yesterday?
It was not good, and I debated an F for him. And I continue to find myself, I just feel like, unfortunately, he's trending down. And some of that I continue to, I brought this up, last week when I was sitting in there with you guys occasionally. I wonder about arm fatigue for Carson Wentz. And when you're asking him to throw the ball 60 times, now his passes right from the beginning of the game were high. So doesn't that, and this goes back to Pederson a little bit, don't you need to just let him settle down, call some shorter routes, but run the ball? Give him an opportunity to get settled into the game, and then ask him to throw the ball more. I just think that Carson Wentz, his mechanics are looking worse and worse week to week, and that goes back to Frank Reich and Doug Pederson to coach him up. And his decisions on when to get out of there and when to run with it, he's doing much better at that, and that is good to see. But he's sitting back there like a statue at times because it's one-dimensional play calling. And I just think that it's hard to evaluate Carson Wentz when you're asking him to put this team literally on his back. And he can't do that. He's one guy. He's a rookie. You can't do that. And it's unfair to him. And I just think he's, again, getting lit up like a Christmas tree back there occasionally. And it's amazing that he hasn't gotten hurt.
And going back to what Mike said when he was asking about Doug's job, are you concerned then about Carson Wentz regressing further if he's around this staff more and more, the way they're calling plays?
I don't know that he can regress too much more with how his mechanics have just looked awful back there, throwing off his back foot, doing the kind of things that you can't do in this league if you want to find success. I'm concerned that he's just going to continue to get beat up in these next 4 weeks. Although you're supposed to get Lane Johnson back in a couple of weeks, what shape is he in? Does it even really matter at this point? And I think that
it almost would be
reps.
Scott. It would almost be frustrating if Johnson came back and they started to play well because you would always be like, "This guy ruined the whole season." You see what I mean? I mean, you know what I mean? Like just by him coming back, if they started to play well, you'd almost want to hold him out just to be like, all right. I don't want anybody to, if you're Johnson. Meanwhile, the Eagles would love to see them pick it back up and be like, "Hey, see, this was the whole reason. This was the only reason right here. This guy."
Yeah, it's a great question on how you want them to finish up once he comes back in, because you could definitely see it. Barber moves back over to where he was, Johnson fills back in, and the line ends the season the way they kind of began it, where they were giving Carson time.
And by the way, remember they do not have a draft pick of their own, so as bad as they are, or going down that road, for people to say, "Oh, just lose because you get the draft pick," they don't have their own pick.
No, you're right. You got to kind of pray for the Vikings to continue to go south, but. Yeah, I think you want to play Wentz. I think you want to continue to give him those reps. You want to give him more time, more plays on film that in the offseason you could see him. Look, nobody debates this. He's a great student of the game. He's very intelligent, and I think in this offseason he will grow. But it's getting through these next 4 weeks. It could be kind of painful.
Scott Grayson, he'll be in tomorrow from 1 to 2, and so he'll have many of his own thoughts, I'm sure, and expand more on Grayson's grades. You'll hear that, and he'll be in for me on Wednesday and Thursday as well. So Scott will have a lot of Eagles stuff on his mind. We'll let him kind of let it marinate for a couple of hours here.
It'll simmer.
Scott Grayson here on 97.3 ESPN. Grayson's grades are up at 97.3ESPN.com. We'll see you tomorrow, Scott.
All right, sounds good. Have a good one.